Good morning. It's December 12th at 9:05. Begin the commission's policy meeting, and I will turn it over to the chair, Judge Marsico. Or in his absence, I will begin the meeting by taking the roll. With us right now is Judge McLaughlin and ex officio member Chairman Fox. Our president in the room, as well as online, I see Representative Bonner, Judge McDermott, and Judge Marsico. If anyone else is online, could you please let us know? And I see Professor Mystic as well. Okay, fantastic. I have the great pleasure today to introduce a speaker to kick off this policy meeting. We're joined by Judge Baracey from Lackawanna County. And as you know, the commission is engaged with an ongoing project related to Senate Resolution 196. And the Senate resolution has a number of items in there that directly address veterans treatment courts. So just briefly, Directive 2 of that resolution calls for the commission to look at the number of criminal cases in which a criminal offender was summoned to a veterans treatment court between 2016 and 2021. Asks us to assess the amount of money necessary to establish additional veteran treatment courts across the Commonwealth. Asks us in Directive 8 to assess the current healthcare treatment options available while enlisted in a veteran treatment court. And finally, in Directive 9, to assess and identify additional healthcare treatment options that would be beneficial to make available for offenders enrolled in a veterans treatment court. Previously, at an earlier session, we had a veteran justice specialist from the VA speak to us about that side of the world, and we thought that having a judge who has expertise in problem-solving courts and who has experience running a veterans treatment court would be very beneficial to the commission and our ongoing efforts. I'll also note that the judge is a member of our Senate Resolution 196 Advisory Board, and in his 25 years on the bench, he has presided over DUI, Family and Veterans Treatment Court. He has served on the National Association of Drug Court Professional Board of Directors, president of the Pennsylvania Drug Court Professionals, and faculty of the National Drug Court Institute. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Judge Baracey and thank him for joining us.
It was wonderful to have a discussion crossing over all everyone's backgrounds and also the involvement in the criminal justice system. There are a couple of things when they mentioned my background that I think is pretty ironic in some ways. I'm truly a convert in many ways, previously being a district attorney for 3 terms, an assistant DA in Philadelphia, special U.S. attorney and attorney general on the National District Attorney's Board of Directors, a person that used to debate former executive chairman Kramer years ago about mandatories, because it was my belief at that time that mandatories were the only way we were going to end the drug problem. And over the years of being not only a DA, but also on the bench, now seeing grandchildren of the grandfathers I prosecuted, came to the stark realization that prosecution in of itself was not the answer, but that it was a tool that's to be used, but that we had to really address the elephant in the room, and that elephant was addiction and mental health. And the only way in which we're able to do that is to say we're not just going to look at this as what is the prior record score and what's the offense gravity score of the particular person in front of us, but what is the problem that they're facing and what do we need to do to make sure that, in fact, we're going to have changed behavior in that individual. And truly, I believe that at this point, after 25 years of being presiding over a treatment court, I do see as the single most important change in the criminal justice system in the years that I have been attorney. Previously, talking about full circle, I also worked as a counselor at St. Michael's Home for the Boys while I was in college. And I saw firsthand how many of our juveniles need habilitation rather than rehabilitation, as we spoke about last night. But a treatment court is truly look at the person's behavior and what we do change behavior. Belief behind it is obviously external force of the courts can bring upon internal change. And there are a great number of studies that have shown that voluntary programs, while successful with many people don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, it's a great day to go to treatment. Many people need to have that nudge, to actually not only get them in the program, but make sure that they are following through on it. So we've been fortunate enough in Pennsylvania to have really been at the forefront of many of the treatment court programs. And I will outline just a little bit about it for those that aren't familiar, and try to get quickly through that and get right into our Veterans Treatment Court. Obviously, it's a program supervised by the court, comprehensive treatment program for what's termed as nonviolent offenders, but the reality is, just like every other program, the way it starts, it has certain guidelines I call desk drawer rules, change as you go along, especially when we start talking about veterans and whether or not some of their offenses are or are not termed as violent. Program requires regular appearances, depending on which phase you're in. It could be every week, bi-week, or every third week, before the judge, along with other members of the team. You obviously have to meet the eligibility requirements to receive approval from the DA if the charges are to be dismissed. One important thing that I want to go over here today is that there's both voluntary programs and non-voluntary programs in regard to treatment courts. You have to participate in not your assessments, but all the other ancillary and collateral services, attend your meetings, and submit to random and scheduled drug testing. Most of the, for participants, what the requirements are, you have to be 18, again, nonviolent offender, drug, chemically dependent, and in our other courts might be a mental health involvement, charged with drug-related alcohol, felony or misdemeanor charges to include but not include thefts, possessions, but any other ones that a court may allow. There are 3 different ways to get into a treatment court program, which I think is important. First, then we'll enter a treatment court guilty plea colloquy. If the program is completed, the participant's charges may be dismissed and later expunged upon petition of the court. This is a voluntary option to enter the program. That requires DA's approval. The second is a defendant may be also placed into one of our treatment courts as a non-voluntary condition of sentencing. That's often the case in regard to a veterans court. If the person did not get the approval from the DA in regard to the charges being dismissed, we then look at making sure that they're going to receive those services regardless of the fact they're not accepted into the other program. And then lastly, a defendant may be placed into a treatment court following resentencing on a Gagnon violation. So a person was sentenced, they now violate, deem that the drug and alcohol or mental health assessment says that that's the underlying problem. So in regard to the probation violation, instead of incarceration, we again look at a non-voluntary condition of resentencing as being the treatment court. Treatment court is a minimum 18-month process. Each phase requires a different amount of responsibility. So obviously in the first couple, we'll go into them. It's more about the treatment aspect. It's not, doesn't look as much in regard to the ancillary services that are necessary, whether it be work or education, but it's really to focus in on the treatment phase. To advance to the next phase, each participant must complete the minimum requirements in regard to that specific phase. And upon completion of the 4 phases, as I mentioned, they both have it dismissed and expunged, depending upon whether it's a misdemeanor or felony and how long it's going to be. The early phases are, we try to do them shorter rather than the longer at the end. Our 4th phase is 6 months, but in the first 2 phases, want to be able to show the participants that this is not going to be something that goes on forever, that there's hope, and that their successful short completion of programs get recognized, and we move them into the next phases. So the first one is 30 consecutive days in an outpatient setting. This may be after they already did an inpatient setting. So many of our people, as a matter of fact, most now that are involved with the opioids end up in inpatient first and then come to us afterwards. They do not get credit for that time in our first phase. It's the time that they are on the streets that they get credited. Afterwards, again, they're reporting to the probation officer, the case manager. We have a 501c3 nonprofit advocacy nonprofit that supports our treatment court, and it's called the Recovery Bank, and it operates complete separate from our courts and helps with everything holistically, everything from education, work, employment services, cooking, yoga, you name it. It gets into it to give a more holistic approach and to also show the participants that it's not just the criminal justice system, us against them, but that there's other pathways to recovery outside of the court. We also look to see what we can do in regard to GED classes, tutoring, and testing. The next phase, again, is a 60-day phase, same requirements essentially, but now we start getting into obtain gainful employment or other educational programs. The third phase, much longer, 120 days. They come bi-weekly to court rather than every week. They again meet with their probation officers and case managers, have to continue with their recovery and treatment meetings until they are deemed no longer necessary by the treatment provider. And then finally, minimum requirements for the final phase, 100% abstinence, continued participation in their treatment plan, monthly court hearings. And again, during this entire time, they are also on what we call color. The individuals have to call in every single morning into the probation office and see if their color is called. Their color is called, and they have to come in for testing that day before 8 o'clock in the morning. There are exceptions that are made in regard to women with children, and we have another way of testing them so that they don't have to bring them in at that early hour. But for the most part, the color system is you can get called in 2-3 times a week sometimes, and you have no idea when that's going to be. Participants who amass is so how do you get terminated? The question often is that, what's your success rate? What's the graduation rate? And why would somebody get terminated? Obviously, if you have multiple violations and you need to be terminated, you'll be sentenced just as though it was a normal guilty plea. Violations of the treatment court include positive drug tests, failure to attend appointments or scheduled outpatient meetings, failure to attend treatment court, and obviously new charges. It does not mean that if a person has any of these or all of these, that they will automatically be terminated. Depends on where they are, what phase they are. If they're in the early phases, we recognize that some of these things are going to happen. We don't want them to, but in the later phases of treatment, it looked at more seriously and weighed heavier in regard to their possibility of termination. The Veterans Treatment Court is an outgrowth of these specialty courts under the umbrella of the treatment court. So essentially is the regular treatment court with a lot of add-ons. The team uses a team-based approach that includes the judge, the attorneys, probation officers, case managers, mentors, treatment providers, Veterans Administration, and the community. So a problem-solving court for veterans whose substance abuse and mental health issues have contributed significantly to their current arrest or conviction of a crime. VTC provides veterans with the tools and knowledge to remain arrest-free and live a life in recovery. Objectives of it are to reduce participants' criminal recidivism, facilitate sobriety, abstinence, and improve behavioral health, promote public safety through treatment while assisting and supporting veterans, their families, to coordinate a response. And the important part there is their families, because often many of these individuals come back from service and their families, the fact that they haven't been with their families the entire time, there may be problems with their children, might be with their spouse. It could be a matter of the family having to deal with issues for the veteran when he or she comes back that needs some type of treatment. And so we address those issues and also help with issues, for example, for often some of the children have some issues that we need to make sure they're getting the appropriate counseling for. We have to alleviate issues surrounding veteran service-related behavioral health issues, improve participants' family relationships and social support connections, assure VA benefits and services are fully accessed by the participants. So besides working with the VA, we also have veteran attorneys that we work with, and we also have worked through our U.S. Senators' offices to make sure we are able to get an individual the benefits that they fought for. What's the difference? Veterans and courts and treatment courts have certain distinctions. One, a participant in veteran court does not have to enter a treatment court guilty plea colloquy. So often, the reality is, as I mentioned, for most treatment courts, it's a nonviolent offender. Often what we find is our veterans have, whether it be domestic violence situations or whether it be the fact that they have been used to carrying a weapon the entire time while they've been in service and all of a sudden return home and want to carry that weapon. There are unique situations in a veterans court that we don't see in our regular treatment court. So we have recognized that and said they still are deserving to have that support from the criminal justice system. So we do bring them in. Veterans courts include veteran mentors. So these are veterans. They're actual veterans that volunteer their time, come in every week into court and take on one of the defendants as a person, a mentee, and they work with them. It's an extra layer of support and guidance for its participants. What it actually does often in many ways is let the participants realize is, everyone's not out against it. Here's a fellow veteran. They're going to be able to talk to you about their experiences, their hope, things that have gone in their life. Many of them, in fact, are in recovery, and many of them are not in recovery. Veteran court participants will be assigned to a specific probation officer, one who specializes in this area of rehabilitation. Our treatment court works in tandem with various other veteran rehabilitation services, such as Valhalla, Veterans Affairs, and the Vet Center. Some of those are specific just for those that have served in combat. Others are a little more tend to deal with mental health problems. Veteran court participants are permitted to attend veteran-specific recovery groups tailored for veterans, such as veteran AA meetings or veteran meetings at a recovery bank, again, which is our nonprofit. Veteran mentors, as I had mentioned, are a key component in the Veterans Treatment Court. They provide peer-to-peer direct support to the veteran participants. Mentors are tasked with developing supportive relationships with veteran participants. These relationships have shown to normalize recovery, thereby increasing the likelihood of successful completion. Mentor relationships help veterans remain in treatment, maintain sobriety, and stabilize from mental health disorders. The goal is to restore veterans to a law-abiding behavior and reduce recidivism. A mentor's feedback to the court is invaluable. Those mentors come in and say whether or not they spoke to the mentee that week, how often they spoke to them, often what's going on in their life. Is there obstacles or barriers to their recovery? Are there things that we can be doing to support that veteran in regard to those obstacles that they have? To become a veteran court mentor, you must first complete a short application with our office. Become a mentor, you must not only complete that, you have to then attach your DD 214 form so that we see what your service involvement was. Upon being accepted, the mentors will complete a certification process conducted by All Rise. All Rise is the National Association of Treatment Court Professionals. And again, it is a course that has been between the VA and between the All Rise so that the mentors know their role, because often we don't want them stepping over. They're not attorneys. They're not there to give counseling in regard to rehabilitation or treatment. That's not their role. They're there to be a peer-to-peer support. Once assigned to a participant, mentors are required to commit to the program for at least 1 year or a duration that the assigned participant is in the program. All mentors have to have 4 to 6 mandatory training hours by the end of each calendar year. The VA involvement. Upon receiving a Veterans Justice Outreach referral, and the VJOs, I think I heard earlier that you had one that here to testify. They are invaluable. They are the connection, the liaison between the VA and the courts. When I was growing up, the VA was a nasty word to be said in our house. I can tell you right now that the VA, at least the ones that we have been working with, have been very, very supportive and have provided a great deal of support. We not only deal with the local VA, but often they get shipped out to whether it's Bath, Pennsylvania, or Texas and other places to be specific as to what the ailment that the veteran may have. And some of these are long-term, 1 year, 18-month programs that the participants truly receive a great support from. Once a person has been arrested, and we make sure that on all of our processing forms, there is a check mark for someone being a veteran. One of the problems that we often see is that veterans do not self-identify themselves in the arrest process. They are embarrassed over it and don't self-identify. But the VJO, especially if the person is in the prison or at our central court is there, and to talk to them and see whether or not they're appropriate. Refer to the VA, completes a biopsychosocial assessment beginning with child and progressing to the present to include mental health and substance use disorder. If any use is noted, veterans are referred for a screening for our substance use team for additional screening. An ACORN, assessing circumstances and offering resources for needs screening is conducted, which focuses on 9 social risk domains. Referrals are made based upon the results. All veterans complete a suicide risk assessment at initial screening, and depending upon answers, may have additional screening. Outpatient mental health includes psychiatry, general therapy, evidence-based trauma therapy, community intensive case management for veterans with serious mental illness, which includes a social worker and a nurse visiting the home. Substance use disorder, medically assisted treatment, outpatient individual therapy, intensive outpatient 9 hours a week, step down to IOP 1 to 2 groups a week in individual. Residential rehabilitation, 21 to 28 days in Wilkes-Barre, which is about 16 miles from Scranton. There are also longer-term rehabs in both Bath and Butler VAs. Moral recognition therapy groups, intimate partner violence, social worker, homeless programs, which are located in Scranton. There's a 30-bed facility. We also have a HUD-VASH program, which is similar to Section 8 for those in regard to public housing. It provides the veteran with a voucher for their rental. We also have homeless programs in Coatesville, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. Full medical care, acute psychiatric unit, whole health acupuncture, yoga, and chiropractic care. We have 24-hour emergency care, and then we also provide Uber to connect the veterans for their appointments so that there's no excuses to the travel, which obviously in some of the rural areas could be a problem. How about those that don't qualify? We do not, we do take individuals into our court, even if they are less than honorable discharge, and for some, a dishonorable discharge. In the beginning, that was a great question, is why would you take somebody with dishonorable discharge? And what we found is that many individuals had done more than 2 or 3 terms of duty. And afterwards, after serving successfully and rejoining, it wasn't until the second or third time that they got bounced, possibly for drug use or for other mental health problems that were related to their service. So we therefore take them in, most of them in. There have been some exceptions that people had committed some heinous crimes and were not allowed into our program. For those veterans that are not eligible for the VA but would like to utilize additional resources, we have Equines for Freedom, equine therapy. We worked with a local horse farm that had equine therapy, and were able to secure funding for the veterans. And I am very surprised how many of the veterans truly enjoy that program. Valhalla Veteran Services, again, a veteran service organization that supports veterans and comes to our court every week. The Recovery Bank, veteran-based community recovery meetings, employment services, resources such as outreach and goodwill, and then again, a community-based treatment. According to the ACORN, the largest risk among our veterans are isolation, loneliness, food insecurity, employment, and social climate. Through our changing social perception, veterans have had an increase in firearms charges as more are carrying in order to protect themselves. One of the questions I was asked of me, what can we do to expand the courts? One of the things I think can be done is one county serving participants from several different counties. And the reason I bring that up is often some of the counties may be too small, and not a matter of just resources, but one thing about a veterans court that I find different from other courts is that much of the success of veterans court is because of the other veterans. One thing that we see is veterans support other veterans. They have their backs. We see that in all the social programs that we have. We do various things like a bike tour, several walks, picnics, different things, and you see the veterans support one another and help one another. Somebody needs to be moved, if somebody needs furniture, the other veterans get together and really work to make sure, and if somebody they see is suffering they're the ones that come forward to the probation officers or to the mentors and say, Tom's really suffering. He and his wife have had a hard time. Their child's sick, whatever it may be. The other veterans really stick up for one another. So in a small county that doesn't have a large veteran criminal justice involvement population, often it would be better if they came to a larger county where you'd have more veterans and the mentors that go with it. It's awfully very difficult to start up a veterans court with all the bells and whistles if you only have a few participants. To have that work, you have to have probation officers from the participants' county to do the actual supervision, because obviously you couldn't have the officers from the other county going in. Also, the use of video conferencing. We have found this to be very effective. It was an outgrowth, obvious, of COVID. And while it cannot be used for regular court proceedings or status hearings, we find that it can be used. And it's a very good way of making sure you not only keep contact with the participants, but you will often have situations that, for example, there's a problem with the participant and you want to make sure it's being addressed. Rather than bring them in, often what we'll have is what we call a round table, which really is the providers. It would be the VA, it would be the probation department, the DA, the defense attorney, and the participant over video conferencing, just to check in on Tom to see exactly what the problem is and what we can do to help. And then obviously the coordination from the VA for the Veteran Justice Outreach individual. I can tell you right now that the VJO that works with us has been asking us to help coordinate our regional court because she's getting a great deal of interest from veterans in other counties that do not have a veteran court. And it's really sad that we have veterans out there that aren't able to afford themselves the same benefits. And finally, I'd just like to make one short note here in regard to the Sentencing Commission of DUI court. I believe that DUI court is going to need to be looked at not only by this legislature, but also by this commission in regard to now the fact that we have Deanna's Law and we have a number of other lengthening the maximum 7 years in regard to DUIs, and what that's going to do, not only in regard to prison population, but also when we look at reducing recidivism. As I mentioned when I first started this to you, one of the things I realized is that arrest in of itself, by itself, is not the answer. While it is the first step, I strongly believe that it's the DUI court requirements that will lower recidivism and make our streets and society safer. And we find that the lowest recidivism of all of our courts is our DUI court, often because of socioeconomic and the risk factors that are involved with the individuals. We find that the treatment has truly been the silver bullet in that regard. And with that being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Not that familiar with the Veteran Justice Outreach Program. Could you kind of expand a little bit about how available that is and what all it entails?
So for each one of the VAs, there is for a region, there is a VJO. And that VJO has a responsibility of going to the various counties in which he or she is assigned and to work with the criminal justice system to see what we can do to get veterans involved with the services that they need. So in our situation, what we've done is we've set up basically a protocol with the police departments, and what we have a central processing center, and then we also have a central court, and then the prison. So they contact her or she'll contact them, and they have a list of the individuals that were picked up either the night before or over the weekend that are veterans. And then she will make personal contact with them and see whether or not they are A, appropriate for our program, or second, does she need to get them into veteran services. So in some cases, many individuals will not come into the veterans court, but we will make sure that they are connected with the services that they need. Maybe instead, and one thing that we don't want to do is have a larger net effect. of bringing people into the criminal justice system just to get them the services. So often what we'll do is the person is arrested and we'll say, what can we do to divert this person? Not bring them into court if it's not serious enough. It's not a high risk, high need individual. It's really a one-time matter that doesn't need to have long-term criminal justice involvement. That VJO will look to say, what services do they need? They need drug and alcohol. They need some other short-term, might be a acute mental health crisis that the individual had. They might be off their meds. Could be a number of things. So the VJO really looks to say, what can I do to hook this person up to the service they need? And then they turn it over to the criminal justice side to say, do we need to keep this person in the system or can we flush them?
Good, thank
And they follow up on when the person is in there. They then report back to court every week in regard to that person's involvement. Are they seeing their psychiatrist? Are they showing up at their groups? Are they making their individuals? How are they doing on their housing? Often the VJO will work with our community resources to make sure that they have placement. How are they doing in the placement? Are they following the rules? So they really are for us, the eyes and ears often for the courts, but also they're the support system for the veteran that's in our court. And I tell you, without them, the program doesn't.
Judge Brace, we have a question from Judge Marsico. And
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind, Judge, could you pull the mic just a little closer? I'd hate for them to not hear the wonderful information.
Bryce, seems to me anecdotally that the veterans courts have some inherent advantages. Their population has at one point done something successful in their life. The VJOs that you just talked about, but just anecdotally, it seems like the mentors play such a huge role in the veterans court success. I know you have a vast amount of experience here in the Commonwealth and nationally with treatment courts. Is there any thought to try and replicating that mentor idea in other treatment courts?
So it has been utilized, Judge, in regard to mental health, because there are a number of associations like NAMI and others that provide advocates for mental health. And so that probably the one court that, other than the Veterans Court, that we've seen the most organized, certified effort has been on mental health issues. But in regard to other ones, there really has not been the push for certification. And that it's important that we have to realize what their roles are. But the mentors in regard to the VA, as well as the advocate for those that are in our mental health courts, has been invaluable. And like you said, the fact that veterans are very proud. I have two colonels in my program, and then I've had others that have only made it through boot camp. But many of them have been very, very successful in their career, and the bonding part again in Veterans Court, I think, is an added bonus. If this was in my court, my sheriff would take your phone off you. But I'm waiting for my mother to call me.
I just have a quick question for you, Judge. First of all, thank you for your presentation this morning. So how many treatment courts do you currently have in your county? And I guess the reason I'm asking is, in Beaver County, it's a smaller county. We have a limited number of judges. And this is something I'm very passionate about, something I'm trying to get into Beaver County. Right now, we just have a veterans court as far as treatment courts go. And I'm just trying to figure out a way to get maybe a little more buy-in from the judges and how we can make it palatable for them, I guess.
So we have, as mentioned, a number of treatment courts. So I have both my adult male and female courts, and I keep them separate because for a while there, we thought they were going to be our pregnancy courts because they were all in there together. And so we had to separate them out. We have a co-occurring. So those are individuals that have both mental health and drug and alcohol issues that are severe. As I had mentioned last night at the meeting, and when we first started off, I said I wasn't going to take anyone in the courts that had serious mental health issues. And we now find that 82% of our population has some type of mental health issue. Besides our veterans court, our DUI court, we have a domestic relations court. We have a woman's track. So the women's track essentially is any woman that is placed into our prison, within 48 hours, there is an assessment to see whether or not there's children involved, whether or not, what's the living arrangements. They're then brought into the court to see whether or not they're appropriate. They may not be taken it. They may or may not be taken into our treatment court, but regardless, they're kept on our women's track to see if it's appropriate for their release so that they don't lose their apartment or house. Number one. No, actually, number one is the children don't have to be put into placement. And then second of all, that they're not going to be losing their apartment. We then follow those individuals. We make sure that there is a caseworker assigned to them, Office of Youth and Family Services, if it's appropriate, also has somebody assigned to them. But the goal there is that we don't have these children being separated from their families, whether it be mom or father. We also have a Gagnon court, and that basically is those people that have violated their probation, and it's because of mental health or drug and alcohol issues, rather than simply placing them back into prison. We look to see what can be done there. We have a domestic violence court. We have a mental health court.
So, I mean, I counted almost 10. So how many judges do you have participating in that?
So besides myself, we have one judge, Judge Moyle, who does the domestic violence court. I used to do the mental health court, but I turned that over to Judge Giroulo because I was at my wit's end in regard to it. And I do the others. So it's usually my Thursday docket. It does get difficult when, if I'm in trial, or I'm here. So obviously I'm not there today. But it does take some time. But what I have found is that overall, especially since my docket primarily all these years has been criminal in nature, that it really does address those that have the highest risk, highest need, and therefore we're not seeing them. And often we're not seeing their families because, as I mentioned before, I was seeing grandchildren of the grandfathers I prosecuted, and now we're seeing as a break and in that cycle. And I can tell you one of the, it's again, I'm a convert, but we have our summer picnics, and there could be 400 or 500 people there, and I mean you have people bringing their grandchildren, and that's generational. You're seeing real change. So. Yeah. It is time consuming, and there is money that's expended, but all the studies show that the money that's spent is returned at least 7 times over by the lack of recidivism and the lack of incarceration.
Great. Thank you.
Can I just ask one more question, sir? So funding, you mentioned programs like paying for Uber for treatment. You mentioned a lot of the county services that are used. Is there specialized funding outside of that is used in all the courts, some of the courts? And
So,
can you talk a little bit about that?
Almost all the courts for startup look for some type of funding grant opportunities. So there's everything from SAMHSA, which is a federal program, to the Byrne grants, to the Department of Justice grants that are given out. There is also on a state level, through both the PCCD and also through the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts, there are various grants that are given out. Many of those are restrictive in regard to what they can be spent for. So the hunt always is for that non-restrictive monies that can be used. What we have found, because of the heroin epidemic and all the problems that the deaths that have occurred from it, unfortunately, it takes a tragedy to move the system sometimes. And in this particular case, we find that there has been, over the last 4 or 5 years, a tremendous amount of grant opportunities that are out there. We also have the opioid settlement fund that provides the counties a great deal of money. And for example, we just had in Lackawanna County, I believe this year alone will be about $900,000. And that, for some counties, is just a drop in the bucket. But that money is going to be around for at least the next 10 years. So any county that really wants to start a program has the seed money they need, and money should not be a reason why they can't start. There's also, in regard to the veterans programs, there are specific grants for veterans. Probably the the easiest one to get.
Any other questions for the judge? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to thank Judge Barres for joining us.
Thank you.
much. Thank you. Both insightful for the commission, of course, but also for our ongoing investigation. Senate Resolution 196. We talked to the judge last evening a little bit about this model and funding issue directly related to the directives that we've been asked to address. So thank the judge very much.
Literature to read.
Great, thank you.
Folks, enjoy. Take care. Thank you very much.
So we're going to pivot now to our next speaker today at the policy. And as you know, the commission over the last, I'll say 5 years, has really been trying to increase some of its technologies, beginning with revamping our website. That was kind of step one, and the application information technology unit in concurrently with the 8th edition guidelines has been working on updating, revising both the legacy application of SGS Web, but replacing it with what we're calling the Commission on Sentencing Record Exchange. So our unit manager of the Applications Information Technology Unit, Christy Bundro, is going to be providing an update on that project, and that will be followed by some other technology leveraging by the unit manager of our Education and Outreach about e-learning, training related to guidelines. I think where we left off related to this project at our last commission meeting was we had broken ties with our vendor working with us, and Christy and her unit have come up with a more comprehensive plan and a timeline related to when it will be expected that this project will. As we've noted on many occasions, there's been significant delays, and so the pretty aggressive and original timeline has not been met, and this is more realistic. I think also, not trying to steal all Christie's talking points, but we've benefited greatly also from interaction had with courts, users, judges, patient staff, court staff, whoever that. So with that, I'll turn it over before I use all her talking points.
You do that to me every time. Thank you and good morning, everyone. So as Matt mentioned, over the past few years, we've been working toward a complete redesign and rebuild of SGS Web, our sentencing guideline software. Just as a reminder, the new application is going to be called the Commission on Sentencing Records Exchange, or CASER as an acronym. So I'm going to provide a quick update on the project status, and then I'm going to attempt to do a live demo of what we've developed so far, as long as everything cooperates with me. Again, originally we had partnered with an agency called InfoMatrix to develop the application. At the end of July, or around July, they informed us they could no longer commit to completing the project within the remaining contracted budget. And given some other concerns that we had with them, we did mutually agree to end our relationship with them rather than renegotiate the contract. And then given the expertise that we had in-house and what we had already accomplished, we decided to move forward with the project with our in-house team, supplemented by independent contractors as needed. In September, the commission did approve a service purchase contract with Carbon Creek, which is a company in Clearfield, to provide a front-end developer. That developer joined our team on September 23rd, and so far that's been going very well. So it's been going so well, we're going to extend her contract. So we'll discuss that a little bit more in the business meeting later. So this org chart now shows our current team that is working on the project. On this slide, I've identified a couple of other potential positions where we might need additional help and would need to hire contractors. So an additional full stack developer and an additional tester. We're going to wait a few more months just to see how productive the current team is before we decide to add those resources. So here is our new project timeline, kind of given all of these changes. So with our smaller in-house team who also have other responsibilities beyond this project, we now estimate that the application development and testing will be completed in September of 2026. And then after that development is complete, we would spend several months piloting the application with a few select counties before beginning a statewide rollout in 2027. So obviously this timeline is much longer than what the project vendor had provided before, but I think it actually takes into account the complexity of the project, working with a smaller team and that sort of thing. So I think it is a very realistic schedule. I will say that if we're concerned about funding, the JRI2 funds that the commission has already received, which are earmarked for this project, will completely support the remainder of the project and will likely cover some of the future phases that we have planned as well. And then I'll also say that we do still also have SGS Web, our previous application that was updated to support the 8th edition guidelines, and we continue to extend and support. So there's not really a need to rush a new application out there. You know, we can take our time and make sure we do it the right way. This slide has our roadmap for the application development. I shared it with you guys the last time, so I'm not going to go into detail about it, but it just mostly shows the major features and the functions of the application and the sequence that we plan to develop them in. And so since we parted ways with the vendor, we've been focused on continuing to make progress while we kind of restarted the project and figured out how we were going to move forward. So the work that we have been doing so far is represented in those orange boxes. So we were working on tackling some significant technical challenge that had been on our list for a while, but we just hadn't made time for, such as connecting the CASER application to the JNet portal and developing our integration with AOPC, which feeds in all of our case data and offender data. And we also took the time to address a bunch of design and implementation issues, which has really put us in a better place to work on the next set of features, which is those blue boxes. Okay. So let me switch gears real quick and I'll get into the application and show you what we've been working on.
And while Christy transitions the slide, just want to mention that we're now joined also by commission members, Senator Street and Judge Dowling.
And just for the record, Judge McDermott had to step out and do a bench warrant. He will return.
Okay, so this is, in case you've never seen it, this is the JNet portal, or the Justice Network portal. So a lot of our users use this application to connect to, oh, sorry about that. Into my sharing. Okay. Do it again. That's better. Okay, this is the JNet portal. So there's a whole bunch of applications across this that are provided by the state that they can access, such as the police, Pennsylvania State Police Portal, a bunch of PennDOT applications, and so on and so forth. This is where our court users currently come in to access SGS Web. This is the test site. This isn't the actual production site. So this is where they come to access SGS Web today, and then this is where they would eventually come in to access the new application CASER. So they would come in and click that menu button, and it would take them to our new CASER application. So this is our homepage for the application. It's still under development, so there's a lot of blank spaces on it. But on the left here, this is where we can put any sort of information that we need to give to our users about the application or system outages. In the middle here is a quick search for them to easily find whatever case they're looking for. So they can search by the person's name, they can search by the date of birth, the SID, the docket number, and so on and so forth. In the future, in the blank space below, we'll have some quick links for them to be able to easily navigate to cases they've previously worked on or recently worked on, as well as some quick links to reports that we think they'll want to run on a frequent basis. So they would come in here, they would enter whatever search term they had. So I have a last name 11, click search. It takes them to our offender search page. So again, it takes them to the search. They look down here, which has the results of the search that they performed. If it's the right person, they can click on the record. If it's not the right person, of course, they could search for somebody else. I'm going to click on the record. And this takes them to the offender dashboard. So one of our goals for the new application was to make the application more offender centric. So the legacy application is very much based on the individual sentencing event. So it's hard to find all the information for one person. And so that's what this offender dashboard does. It takes all the information that we have as the Sentencing Commission and puts it into one place. So on the left, you'll see their personal information, like their demographics and any aliases that we know of and any identifying information. In the top here, you'll see sentencing. So these are any cases that they have that are either going to be sentenced or have been sentenced. And then in the bottom here is any criminal history information that we've received from AOPC that could be used for a prior record score or could be used to perform a sentence risk assessment. Make sure. And then in the future, once we automate our data exchange with the parole board, we might actually add another panel here to display any sort of information that would be useful that we're getting from the parole board about the parole guidelines or the recommitment ranges. So, so we do have another search here. So the first search I showed you showed the offenders and a list of offenders when you search. This one searches for actual cases. So instead of returning a list of offenders, it returns a list of cases. So let me just type that. 70 search. And so I can see for this person, there's actually 2 cases in our system for him. Another difference with SGS Web is whenever you start a case in SGS Web, you actually have to trigger the import from AOPC. So every user, when they're ready to start something, they have to go to a web page and trigger that import of data and wait for the data to be imported. With Caser, we have a speed of data that's coming from AOPC. And so that data should already be in our system and readily available to the user whenever they're ready to start producing sentencing guidelines. So they would search for the case they're looking for. They could say, okay, I'm ready to start this case and click this Begin JP button. If they've already started a case, they can always just go in and look at the existing case that they've started. So this is our view of the judicial proceeding. We've set it up so it's almost like a wizard. So it like really takes the user through each step that they need to do in order to produce sentencing guidelines. When we get to sentence submission, it'll be the same thing. Here are the steps you need to complete in order to submit the sentence. So on here again, you'll see the same offender panel to the left. They can update the offender's information if it's incorrect, but this is the information that we would have received from AOPC. They'll see the list of the charges or the offenses that this person has been charged with. Another difference with SGS Web and SGS Web, you have to actually add each individual charge to the case. And here it just imports it from AOPC. So they don't really need to do anything if it's all correct. They can go through each one and make changes. This is where they would also, if an enhancement, a sentencing enhancement applies, they would choose, like if deadly weapon applies, they would click on deadly weapon enhancement. They would say if it was like used or possessed, and then any other information that we want to collect would be displayed here as well. Or if a domestic animal was harmed or killed, they could apply that enhancement as well. Let's see what else they can do. From this page, they could also, if there is an offense missing for some reason, this is where they would say, you know, I don't know why that offense didn't come over, but here's where I would add that offense. So 24, I search for it. Let's say I know the title and section. Anything that matches appears below. I look through and I realize that they've been charged with just a, let's say, simple assault. I add it to my case. It appears on the screen there, and then they can fill out the same kind of information. They know the count number, they would have to put that in there. And then this one is asking for victim age. So we'll put the victim age in there. And again, the enhancements that could possibly apply to this offense are deadly weapon and domestic violence. So here they might say it was a domestic violence case, select the relationship to the victim and note whether a minor witnessed it or not. Other things they could do, instead of creating a brand new offense, if they just wanted to copy one for some reason, there's a copy offense option there. Or let's say this offense, you know, they messed it up and they want to delete it, so they could just delete it from there as well. Okay. And then I'm going to actually go back and look at, oh no, this is the, okay. And so once they've got all the offenses entered, the next step is to do the prior record score or information. So they would click save and continue. Maybe. Sorry, it's a little slow. The network in here is a little slow. Okay. So on this page, they have two options. So we've imported the criminal history information from AOPC. If they don't have any out-of-state charges or they don't have any federal charges and the AOPC information is complete, that could be used to generate the prior record score. If for some reason something is missing from the data that we have, they can choose to manually enter data. And so what they would do is they would say, for these charges, the prior offense group, if you remember how PRS is calculated, you choose your prior offense group is POG 2. The number of convictions that they have are, you know, maybe 2. And then the reason why they're having to manually enter it. So in this case, the AOPC data is incorrect or incomplete. So the one thing this allows them to do that was a problem in SGS Web is in SGS Web, you could only calculate one prior record score for every charge, but this allows them to actually calculate different prior record scores if a different one applies. For instance, if there was a big time gap between two charges that are in the system and there was a conviction that happened in between, that could be counted for the second one, but not, you know, counted for the first one. And then the last thing I'll show is once they've entered all the information, this is where it shows here are all their current charges. Here is the offense gravity score for each of those charges. And then here's the prior record score that was calculated, which is incorrect based on the information I entered, but don't worry about that. It's still under development. And then on this page, we do just ask them to confirm that the information is correct before they move forward. And then once they move forward, that's where they generate the guideline form that the judge, we print it out, the judge then gets that so that when the sentencing hearing is happening, he has the information right in front of him. So hopefully by the next meeting or the June meeting, I can demo further on in the process, but that's all I have for now. So are there any questions? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so. All right, back over to Matt.
So I just want to, one, thank Christy and her team, or Craig, Stephanie, John and Matt. You could see a tremendous amount of work went into it. Really thoughtfully designed from a user perspective, and of course, having to get all the complexity of the statutes and the law embedded within this, and you can see that specific enhancements will pop up for charges, and it's really a lot of work. Embrace this, done some amazing work, and the features I think will pay off, be friendly, create efficiencies in the field, also have people much more happier. Those who are familiar with the SGS web application, it's functionally great, but maybe from the user perspective. As I noted at the beginning, just to highlight also that Christy's still supporting the old application while developing the new application. A lot going on. Talented. So with that, we'll now turn it over to the manager from Education and Outreach to talk about some of the work that his unit is doing to support the 8th edition guidelines and some of the other guideline developed regards.
Check. There we go. Sorry about that. Just 1 second while we pull up our presentation and we'll get the party rolling here for you. All right. So what I've kind of termed this as is modern educational approaches. So one of the things I think we've tried to do in the Education and Outreach unit was, beyond just the live trainings that we're doing, whether it was the county tour where we went across the state, or more this year, we've reverted back to Zoom-oriented trainings where we have a person in front of a group of individuals providing content to them. We've branched out into other areas, and notably, 2 areas that I want to talk about in a little more detail, I think, because it's maybe more new for us, is our e-learning modules, which we've launched this year. And then we're also building out content that's on our YouTube channel. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Certainly, we still have a variety of traditional other reference guides, documents, and so forth. So keep that in mind as well. But what we tried to do is really meet people where they are, recognizing that our schedule doesn't always match other people's schedules. So how can we still continue to meet, whatever they need from us in different ways? And so e-learning is the first approach that I want to highlight a little bit. So you may be familiar with e-learning in other facets. I know a lot of human resource operations have, different training requirements that are obligated. So that it's similar in that approach. And so what it is a self-paced learning approach. We have the ability to track individuals' progress. So that's helpful for us in knowing who's taking our courses, how are they progressing, and how are they meeting, the different informational needs that we want to try to instill upon them. But as we can appreciate, it's maybe not as captivating as having a person in front of you. So how can we make that presentation a little more engaging? So we have some interactive knowledge checks, graphics, and try to make it a little bit more visually appealing as we go through that. So I have some of the screenshots just to show you our most recent offering related to sentencing levels for 8th edition offenses. We launched that several weeks ago. And as you can see on the screen, on the left hand is the navigation pane where you can see the different sections within that training. So you don't necessarily need to take it sequentially if you don't want to. You can jump around. It'll give you a nice introduction of what we're trying to accomplish, so you kind of know what our learning objectives are for you as the learner. And then it just takes you through the different sections. So I mentioned the interactive features. One of the things I really like about e-learning is we can embed hyperlinks to our other reference materials. So we're kind of cross-pollinating other materials we've already developed and make available. The individual can download that resource, save it, as a link, and then they have, another element of what we're developing for them. And as you can see, there are different ways to pop out the information. So on the bottom, it has a knowledge check where we're just trying to make sure you're understanding the different prior offense group in this example. So it has different cards, and you just cycle those through the different prior offense groups as an example. Knowledge checks. I think it's important, as you're going through, just to make sure you're understanding what we're trying to instill upon you. So we provide those in different ways. Sometimes it's a matching game. Sometimes it's check boxes. And so that's, I think, helpful in applying that information. And then ultimately, try to make it a little fun, have a certificate that some organizations we know across our criminal justice organizations require training for people so they can print off a certificate. But you also will receive notification of what you've completed in terms of percentage of the training and then what your grade is as well. So in order to successfully complete these e-learning modules, you need to have done at least 80% of the course and then also score 80% in the quiz element. So we're really trying to, at least if you're getting the certificate, that you've put that work into doing that. Excuse me. So as I said, we have 3 courses so far that we've launched in this calendar year. We launched our SGS Web before we executed a contract with Articulate 360 is what we're using to develop these courses. So I have some slides on people that have gone through our seminar, but we don't have that information for the SGS Web because that was before we executed that. But then we also released Determining Prior Record Score. Prior Record Score has been a very hot topic this year, so we have that out there for people. And then again, the sentencing levels we just launched last month for people. So you'll see in terms of learners, for Prior Record Score, we had 47 people go through that since July. I think what's really notable is a couple things. Number one, looking at the number of hours spent on that information. So if you think back to what I said initially in terms of if we were providing training, that would have been 43 hours of someone talking to these people. So it's more like a passive presentation to those individuals and getting that information to them. But also the average score, I think, is pretty noteworthy as well, 93%. So having completed the e-learning, I think tangibly they're getting good acclimation to the content that we want to instill upon them. As I mentioned, for the sentencing levels, again, we just launched that in the middle part of last month. So we've had 9 people already complete that. Great score there with an average of 100. So like that. But again, that 8 hours of people going through the course, I think is good for us. And just a quick example of the type of reporting that we get through the software, which I think is helpful for me as manager. As we're releasing other trainings, this is a good way for us to think these are people that have already wanted to engage in this type of learning. So we can do more direct reporting to them of, hey, new modules are available, check them out. So I think that's really helpful. But really, the other area is the amount of time people are spending on the seminars. So, I think that's good for us to see. We like to be realistic in estimates for people when they start the training. Hey, it'll take you 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever that is. So we can use the duration people are spending to give a realistic estimate, and we can update what we've already advertised. So that's our e-learning. I don't know if you prefer me to go through and do questions at the end. We'll do that. The second thing I wanted to highlight in a little bit more detail is our YouTube channel. So I've touched on YouTube a couple times during my reports. We launched our YouTube channel in 2020. I think it was a response to the COVID pandemic and being able to conduct our business. And that's really serving as our repository of our policy and business meetings. So if you ever have a burning desire one day to go back, and what did I say at that March 2021 meeting? You can do that. Go to our YouTube channel. The other area, though, that we've been really trying to expand this year and is a goal for me for next year is releasing more policy-oriented videos. So one of the things I talked about earlier this year was community outreach. And that's more like direct community, not necessarily practitioner outreach. And so we did release a very high-level short video on the criminal justice process in PA. That's on our YouTube channel. We just put that out there recently. So, and we have also recorded. We had one person who has left our unit, but she was recording some policy videos related to prior record score. So we're doing the finishing touches on getting those out there as well. Again, prior record scores, one of our hot topics, so we want to get that out for people. But we're looking to expand our portfolio of those policy-related videos. So looking to add to that, and certainly if there are any areas that members would like us to focus on, happy to incorporate that into our planning. Just to give you a quick view, if you've not been to our YouTube channel, this is our landing page, so you can see the different videos we have available. You can certainly customize how you view that on your own side. But what's notable for me, I think, is we are now up to 91 subscribers, so pretty decent number for our based on the kind of content we have. We do have 78 different videos out there, so again, looking to expand both the people that are coming to our channel, but also what we're offering to them. And I think as we add the policy videos, I think we'll have more subscribers as well. Just a quick view to show you the process of criminal justice in Pennsylvania video, so you can see what you're looking for if you'd like to check that out. I'd love your feedback on that one in particular. Excuse me. And then just to kind of close out our page, we've been in the process of updating the education and outreach portion of our commission page. We've reorganized some of the tiles that we have. So the bottom left portion, we have our seminar. So we've built our 2025 course schedule. So you could check those out, what we're going to be offering. We do have the dates populated on there. And then in the next couple of weeks, we'll start adding registration links for those as well. We restructured some of our tiles. We put together our e-learning and media section. So that's really the e-learning modules we covered. Our YouTube channel link will be there. And then last but certainly not least are our reference guides. I think I counted a little while ago, we're up to about 28 different reference guides related to 8th edition. So we've got a variety of things. Most are just a page or two to try to keep it really condensed to a very specific topic. And I think feedback that I've received as we've gone across Pennsylvania is those are really helpful documents. So I think those are really our highlights in terms of the plan, just looking to expand all of our offerings and meet the needs of practitioners. If you have any questions, happy to answer those.
Bobby, did I hear you say you're going to add the YouTube channel to that same link page? It's not there yet?
It should be there now. Yep.
Okay.
Sounds like you're up to 92 subscribers now there, Bobby. I just wanted to make a comment, but before I do, I'll turn it to Judge Marsico. I see his hand is raised.
Is there any charge for the e-learning modules?
It is free of charge.
And are we putting out there to practitioners that that's available, especially the latest one, to try and get more people take a look at it?
Yeah, so we're trying to deploy a variety of approach. First, we do put that in our monthly newsletter, recognizing we don't reach everybody through that means. We are actually working on an outreach campaign the early part of next year. We don't want to do it now based on timing, where we're trying to compile another list of individuals to reach out to in the counties. And part of that subsequent charge would then be to let people know more of like e-learning, YouTube, and other resources available. So hoping next year we can ramp up, as you noted, the people that are taking these courses.
Right. Thanks.
Yep.
I just wanted to add a couple of comments. First, just thanking Bobby and the Education Outreach Unit, Jen and Tiffany and Krista and Maria. I think within the last year to year and a half, they've really moved the ball forward with the education outreach materials, and I'm excited for all of the information that they're providing. I think, the website page for education outreach is great. It provides a lot of information, and it couldn't have been more timely as we had to deal with the 8th edition implementation. And so they're doing a great job, and they deserve a lot of thanks. And I appreciate Judge Marsico's question, and I know Bobby, as he mentioned, is working to try to reach as many individuals as possible, and we'll continue to build it out. But if you have thoughts, any members, we certainly, as Bobby mentioned, appreciate that. So thanks, Bobby, and your unit.
Thank you.
And I'll just add one last comment just to add some connection to the first two presentations. Of course, Bobby's unit, who has contact with the stakeholders and the users out in the field, provides invaluable input to Christie's unit in the development of the new CASER application. So it's been a real improvement, I think, in terms of the sharing of information within our organization and making sure those feedback loops, and then using every opportunity we can to promote these new resources, of course. So, all right, I'm going to switch seats and move over, provide the next presentation. Wanted to use a little bit of time at this policy meeting to talk about updates related to the Senate Resolution 196 project. We'll hear more from Noah Painter Davis, the Deputy Director, about some other parts of this. But as you might remember, a big component of this was how are we going to even identify who's a veteran? As I noted on many times, our data does not include a flag for that. AOPC does have a flag for that, but my understanding it's not a mandatory field and that it's based on self-identification by individuals. So that data reveals roughly 2% of individuals or dockets being veterans. We know in Pennsylvania that just based on Census Bureau information, that roughly 6.8% of adults are veterans in Pennsylvania. So we thought that 2% probably was a significant underrepresentation. So I want to talk to you a little bit about our efforts to identify or come up with a strategy to get this flag and what's been implemented. And again, since we're thanking all staff, Brett Miller's unit has done an incredible amount of work, and you'll see about interacting and interfacing with a number of different agencies just to develop a flag, which is a check mark or a 0-1 indicator. A lot of work went into that, but it's given us the foundation to really start addressing a number of those directives that we have in the resolution. As we've talked about many times, the resolution directs us to conduct a thorough and comprehensive study on the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, et cetera, for those directly involved in the criminal justice system. Two of the directives are directly related to data. We need to utilize and leverage administrative data to answer these questions. Directive 1 says for each criminal case in this Commonwealth from 2016 to 21 in which the criminal offender is identified as a veteran, the severity of each offense, including the statutory grading, offense gravity score and prior record score, and the disposition of each case. And then Directive 4 says the number of criminal offenders identified as veterans from 2016 to 21 that committed 2 or more offenses between 2016 and 2021 that did not arise out of the same criminal case. There's an additional directive that I mentioned earlier about the number of individuals in Veterans Treatment Court that will leverage AOPC data and then some other data collection efforts. But this is really needing that flag, if you would, to make any sort of analyses about knowing how many people or what the prior record score. So we're going to leverage in these analyses 2 data sets, one being the PCS data set, of course, that includes OGS and PRS, but we're also going to merge our data and utilize AOPC data at a docket level to be looking at a number of charges and so forth. So I made up 4 just rows of data here just to show you this would be a subset of the PCS data. And I think it's just worth noting again that one of the functionalities of SGS Web or our new CASER application is not just to provide information to the decision makers at the time of decisions, but it also is a way that we extract that data for analysis for different types of questions and evaluations that we're responsible for. So in this, there's certainly more than 7 variables or whatever it may be in our data set. But here we have the last name, first name, middle name, date of birth, gender, the SID, a short description of the offense, OGS, and a PRS for these individuals. What you'll notice what's absent is a column for veteran status that we do not have. So since our charge was to look at offenses between 2016 and 2021, we figured a process out where the first step that we needed to do was request rap sheets to obtain Social Security numbers from the Pennsylvania State Police. So Brett and his unit sent about 450,000 SIDs in batches of 5,000 records at a time to PSP. And we got back from them 450,000 Social Security numbers, or not unique since there were duplicates, but that's just step one. And I'll add that because Social Security numbers were involved, this is protective identifiable information. Brett and his unit, as well as Christy and her team, helped us work with Penn State University to make sure we had a secure data portal to not have any kind of threat to the release of these Social Security numbers. Once we get to step two and we utilize those, we delete them permanently from our files. So we're not retaining any Social Security numbers. So we obtain those, and then we learn that there is a service that's available through the Veteran Affairs called VRSS, the Veteran Reentry Search Service. And this is a service that has been historically used by DOC. They would send their records to identify individuals confined in state confinement to identify if they are veterans. It was once it was self-identified, they used this as a validation step for those individuals. But we sent those 450,000 Social Security numbers, date of birth, name, and gender. And in return, we get a flag for veteran status. So in this example, Ronald Guidry would be checked as a veteran in our data. So this then could be linked back to PCS data. And this first process that I'm going to describe is just our efforts utilizing PCS data. We're working on doing a similar exercise with some cases. Not every case is submitted to the Sentencing Commission. So those extra cases, we're doing a similar process for the AOPC cases that are not submitted to PCS. And we'll have a bigger data set that we're going to link this data, the veteran status data, and AOPC data together. So just wanted to highlight one aspect. As we've been talking about veterans clearly, and we even heard the judge this morning talk about the definitions that are used for veterans. So we could imagine a definition being VA eligible, for example. But this tool, this search tool that we utilized, which is, again, leveraged through the Department of Veteran Affairs, using also the Department of Defense Identity Repository, is a little bit more expansive than what I just gave as an example. So it's all individuals enlisted in any branch of the military, including reserves and National Guard. It also includes active military personnel and veterans, so a little bit more expansive as well. There's no service time required for individual to be added to the database. So, for example, you could do 1 day of basic training and be included in this database. Individuals are not removed from the database. So if you have a dishonorable discharge, you're still included. Part of this about the VA eligibility and so forth was thinking about, would this possibly include family members? And it does not include family members of the personnel or their dependents. And then it's not linked, as I said, to military benefits or pension, VA benefit eligibility or insurance information. So we're, if you were, lack of better words, stuck with this definition, since this is all we have with a flag. But again, it's a more expansive view than might be, but it's a little bit in alignment with what the veteran treatment courts are using in terms of non-VA eligible individuals, as well as any service, and not excluding for dishonorable discharges. Okay, so from that data, this again is PCS data from 2016 to 2021. We're looking at judicial proceedings here, and what we found is just slightly less than 6% of the judicial proceedings included a veteran. So slightly lower than the Census Bureau estimate of the number of veterans in Pennsylvania. And again, and conversely, 94% of these judicial proceedings include individuals who are non-veterans. So I'm going to back up. What this allows us to start doing is making then comparisons in our data, things like OGS and PRS, between veterans and non-veterans who were sentenced during this time period. So the first question we were going to ask is, where did the individuals come from? Is it equally representative across the counties? Of course, there's variation at the county level, but at the county class level, we see, especially when you get to the 4th and then 5th through 8th classes, that the proportion of veterans is higher than the statewide average of 5.9%. Not double, but significantly larger, especially than in Philadelphia. And we see a little bit of a higher rate in Allegheny as well in relation to the larger jurisdictions, the more urban, suburban jurisdictions in Pennsylvania. The maybe not surprising, but the vet sample has a higher proportion of males than the non-vets. So a little over 90% of veterans in our sample are males. 75% of our sample of non-vets are males. And when we come to race, we see that our sample is also slightly more white, that veteran population is roughly 80% white, and the non-veteran population is roughly 70% white. One of the, for us, more interesting findings so far has been related to age. In the world of criminology, there's a lot of reference to something called the age crime curve, and it talks about offenders being younger who commit crimes, and then you would age out of crime when you become into your 30s, that there's a real age period where you're committing your offenses. So the orange line here is non-veterans, and the blue line is veterans. So focusing first on non-veterans, we see the average age of non-veterans of the 425,000 individuals is 33.7 years old. And then it declines and moves out very, with a flat tail as you get over about 65 years old. For veterans, the average age is roughly 8 years older, 41.8 years of age for veterans who are being convicted and sentenced in the Commonwealth between 2016 and 2021. So we just looked at those who are 18 to 25 or less than 25 years old. And this is a cumulative percent that I'm going to report on. So only 7.5% of veterans are 25 or under who are in our data set, compared to roughly 22% for non-veterans. So when we look at this older age group to 50 to less than 60, it flips, that it's roughly 22% of veterans are 50 to less than 60, and non-vets are 8%. So we get a very different profile of age of individuals. We don't necessarily have a hypothesis, except that we'll see later about some of the offenses that these individuals are committing might be correlated with offenses that individuals being of an older age might commit at a higher frequency. So moving on then to prior record score. Just focusing on prior record score 0, and all of these offenses, of course, because it's 16 to 21 are under the 7th edition guidelines. Roughly half are PRS 0 for vets, and it's just a small percentage higher than the non-vets. At the higher end here, adding up from PRS 4 all the way through REVOC, veterans have a slightly lower percentage of these more extensive prior record scores. So roughly 20% for veterans, 23.7% for non-veterans. And it's interesting just to note that the driver of that difference seems to be PRS 5. So that veterans have 11% have a prior record score of 5, non-vets 14% have a prior record score of 5. Some of this, I think, also will be illuminated when we start thinking about recidivism and repeat offenders or repeat convictions in the sample that we're going to look at later, that essentially veterans are committing fewer offenses and have lower prior record score. Some of that may be because they're starting old at a later date, but whatever the hypothesis may be. This now shows just a look at offense gravity score. For the most part, you could see they're very similar. But just focusing on offense gravity score 1, 30% of non-veterans have a prior record score of 1, 33% have a prior record score of 1 for veterans. OGS, thank you. Offense gravity score. Thank you. So one way to look at this is to see if we took the highest frequency offense gravity scores, those from 1 to 5, we see that veterans have 85%, 1 to 5, and non-veterans are 83%. So maybe non-veterans are committing slightly more serious offenses than veterans. But again, looking at those bars, they're really close together, except for OGS 1. So another way to look at this is what's the most serious offense that these individuals are committing in their judicial proceeding. So the dark blue lines represent the veterans, the light blue represents non-veterans. So one of the most startling differences or striking differences is that veterans, of their offenses, 31% are for DUI as the most serious in their judicial proceeding, as opposed to 21.7% for non-veterans. Conversely, non-veterans are committing a higher proportion of their most serious offenses are drug offenses. We dug into this a little bit, and really the driver of that difference seems to be that veterans have a lower percentage of possession with intent to deliver as their offenses. It's more similar on possession as opposed to the intent to deliver. When we get to crimes of violence, non-veterans are slightly higher, 2.4% compared to 2.2%. But again, we looked at the type of offenses that fall within these broader categories. And what's notable is that veterans have a higher percentage of sexual offenses and fewer felony 1 robberies. And finally, when we look at the most serious offense in the judicial proceeding, crimes against minors, veterans are higher at 2.6% of their offenses being crimes against minors, non-veterans at 2.1. Again, notable that the veterans have a higher percentage of offenses that were sexual abuse of children in this category. Okay, so that gave a basic descriptive profile, at least addressing a number of the things that were in Directive 1. And now we wanted to take a cursory look at Directive 4. Again, for our report, I think we're going to be looking at the AOPC data and looking at dockets as opposed to here judicial proceedings and PCS data. Just wanted to give you an overview, at least using our data, to see where these differences might be. My expectation is the two data will correlate very high and that we won't see a huge deviation in these results between them. So the first was the directive says the number of criminal offenders identified as veterans from 2016 to 2021 that committed 2 or more offenses between 2016 and 2021 that did not arise out of the same criminal case. So in this first panel, and I'll provide another panel in a moment, we're looking at any sentence, meaning that you could have been sentenced in 2021 for your first sentence, and still we're looking to see if there's another one in following that. So it's a little biased in terms of tracking time for the expectation of multiple sentences for the same person in a different judge proceeding. But needless to say, When we say how many judicial proceedings there are, we focus on that row of 2 or more. We see that veterans have 22.5% of the veterans have 2 or more judicial proceedings, meaning they have a second case before the courts after their first, and non-veterans is roughly 30%. So if we thought of this as a really rough measure of recidivism, we see that veterans are recidivating at a lower rate. But as I mentioned, it's a little biased because we're not controlling for the tracking period. So what the second panel does, we only look at those who had their first judicial proceeding in 2016 and 2017. And then we look in 18, 19, 20, and 21 to see if there is well, we would look also in 16 and 17, but then those following years to see if there is an additional judicial proceeding following that original judicial proceeding. And here we see the values are slightly higher because, again, we'll be tracking people for longer. But that gap is very consistent, that veterans, 30% have 2 or more JPs, and non-veterans have 38.7% have a 2 or more JPs. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think what I wanted to share with the commission was that we have successfully gotten a way to get this flag, and you saw it was a lot of work. A lot of communication with different agencies. So we really appreciate our partner agencies, the Pennsylvania State Police, and then our federal partners, the VA, Department of Defense, providing this opportunity to share this information. We're going to continue to work with AOPC, of course, and make sure as it relates specifically to the Veterans Treatment Court, but also using their data. And I think that we are exploring ways not to just address this question in a similar way, looking at dockets, but I think we're going to look at do a true recidivism study that this is yes or no, was there recidivism, but bring in some notion of time, how long it takes for the recidivistic event to occur after the first. So we'll be using, and we're going to work collectively to come up with a definition, potentially a new arrest, potentially a new filing. So we screen out cases that maybe there was an arrest and it wasn't filed, and then either new arrest or new filing leading to a conviction. And then follow people, if you would, 3 years after their original sentence. So I think we have a great opportunity here, again, to partner with PSP and AOPC to use these other metrics for convictions or for new arrest. So later today at the business meeting, as I mentioned, Dr. Painter Davis will share with you some of our other work, which includes site visits and surveys, speaking to subject matter experts, and then our review of existing literature in the space about veterans. So before I turn it to Ryan for our final brief presentation, I'll certainly open it up for any questions about our data or what's been shared so far. Okay, seeing none, I will turn it to Ryan, and then we'll take a short break before the business meeting and come back at 11 o'clock.
Well, considering it's a 11:15, I'll, in true form, keep this as brief as possible. What I wanted to talk about was, this is the December meeting. We're at the end of the first year of implementation for the 8th edition guidelines. And I thought that this would be just a nice time to highlight, all things sentencing and guideline related that staff here at the commission are working on, sort of thinking about continuing the implementation, thinking about the education and outreach unit as a feedback loop for members as we receive inquiries from practitioners. And certainly, as Bobby had noted earlier, all the efforts to provide additional education to practitioners across the state. So these are the 4 bullets that I want to hit on briefly. As far as 8th edition, I'll sort of say like what's been going on. As I mentioned, we're at the end of the first year, and I'm sure people are excited to hear about what we're hearing about. I'll talk a little bit about recently enacted legislation, and not necessarily specific acts in detail, but conceptually what staff are doing to track legislation in particular as it relates to the guidelines, or, has the General Assembly passed any bills that impact the guidelines, and how does the commission manage that and handle that? And then also related to that, are any recent cases that impact sentencing or the guidelines, or sort of confirm what we know about sentencing or the guidelines? And then lastly, I'll mention briefly just some other initiatives that we continue to work on, and we'll be looking, to 2025 to finish those. So with 8th edition, here are the talking points. Again, this is the first year of implementation. Bobby and his unit went on a county tour, statewide tour of the counties, September of 2023 through the beginning of 2024, and did a wonderful job meeting a number of individuals. Brett's unit, prior to the commission staff going out and meeting with practitioners, did an analysis to sort of try to assume how many cases we would be seeing coming through the system in 2024, and what could be our expectation in terms of the workload on staff and workload on practitioners. And as we expected, it takes time for cases to matriculate through the system, and there will be a lag from when an offense is committed until it's in front of a court. And so from a numbers standpoint, I think we really haven't seen a lot of cases until about this fall. We're starting to see more and more cases for individuals. So I think the takeaway for me, and maybe the education outreach unit, I'll speak for them, maybe I shouldn't, but we all got to wade into the 8th edition pool a little bit slowly down the stairs. And I think that's helpful for the state. We didn't all turn on at once, and 100% of cases in the court were dealing with the 8th edition. So I think that's a good learning for all of us, that we're able to understand the policies and sort of slowly apply them. Bobby's unit continues to provide technical assistance both to the 7th edition cases and certainly to the 8th edition. And that's for SGS Web, and also from policy related standpoint. How do the guidelines apply? What's the prior record score? How can we calculate these? And I just wanted to share a number, and Bobby during the business meeting can report out, but in 2023, we had around 1,200 inquiries. As of November of this year, we were around 1,100 inquiries. And so one of the things that I think is helpful to note there is, we think the 8th edition is working as intended by the commission, right? The train left the station in January of this year and seems to be rolling down the tracks just fine. Some of the things that I think is helpful for us is, some takeaways for the staff. And this is the bullet where I talk about areas of focus. Where are we focusing our education? And you heard Bobby highlight these, prior record score, sentencing levels, and some other areas. And I just wanted to give a little bit of extra information there. I think some of the hot topics that we've dealt with in terms of inquiries and making sure that we have information available to practitioners, there's fundamental changes around prior record score. And so for those of us that have, we're working with 6th edition and 7th edition for the last, 15 or so years, we got pretty good at prior record score in that sense. But we have to change those, how we think about prior record score. And so we're also trying to imprint that on individuals across the state. The expansion of the policy where you don't count something that increases the grade or the statutory max of a subsequent conviction is one of those areas that we have to make sure we're sort of being repetitive on, and making sure individuals aren't inaccurately considering a prior record or a prior conviction in the prior record score. Another area is for prior record score is making sure individuals are not considering any prior DUI conviction when it's a current DUI conviction. And that was a policy decided on because there's so many mandatories around DUIs. The commission in its guidelines really wasn't going to be adding anything to that. And so we just make sure that we're driving home those policy changes. Other areas around the levels, though, that was another fundamental change in the guidelines, really linking those to sentencing alternatives. So that's one of those educational things that we try to drive in to practitioners, encouraging them to read the text of the guidelines, because the intent of the guidelines is really in the language that the commission adopted, and tying those levels to alternatives, and how does that work, and what does that mean in terms of recommendations to the court, and that the areas that I think we saw the most need for a response was level B and level C. Level B is that targeted area of probationary sentences both in terms of general conditions or general probation, supervision, and then also intensity of supervision. So when there might be a need for restrictive conditions based on a higher prior record score, but still a relatively low level offense within the guidelines. And then level C, I always think of it as it's akin to the level 3 level in the 7th edition, but it's taken a little bit of getting used to. You know, it's primarily county recommendation, but the courts can use probation in probation with restrictive conditions in lieu of that. And so Bobby and his unit continue to do a great job on making sure folks have what they need to understand the guidelines. The final two things I'll say about guidelines is that courts are getting used to, and certainly staff for courts are getting used to needing to have reasons for any aggravated or mitigated sentence to submit that to the commission. That's a requirement now in the guidelines. And of course, it's always been a requirement when it's a departure of the guidelines. And then the last part for reasons is that the commission is requiring for murder 3, anytime there's a sentence for murder 3, a reason being submitted, whether the sentence falls within the guidelines or outside of the guidelines. And so, you know, just again, acquainting people to some expanded policies or certainly new policies under the 8th edition. So with that, I'll move on here quickly with recently enacted legislation and case law. And the examples that I've given here of some legislation and the case law sort of link back to those areas that we've seen under the 8th edition where there's been questions and inquiries and efforts. Just as a reminder for members, staff track the General Assembly daily to see what's going on. We want to make sure we understand if there's been any bills passed. You know, if the General Assembly creates a new offense or modifies an offense, it's our responsibility as staff to be bringing that information to you all, because it could impact the offense gravity score or a policy under the guidelines. What I would remind everybody is that with great foresight under the 8th edition, the commission retained its omnibus offense gravity score policy, and that deals with when there's a new or modified offense under the guidelines, but also built in for the first time an omnibus sentencing enhancement policy. And I think what's been exciting, of course, we live this every day about guidelines, but what was exciting was the General Assembly mandated the commission to develop a sentencing enhancement for homicide by vehicle or aggravated assault by vehicle where an individual is using a mobile device, right, while they're driving. And what's great is we have a omnibus sentencing enhancement. And so for the first time, we're not having to come to the commission and say, we need to amend the guidelines to develop and adopt a new enhancement. It's built into the text of the guidelines. So that was kind of, I guess for us, a little fun to see the guidelines in action and working as intended. So the other acts that I just mentioned here get to both the omnibus OGS and some changes in language that we'll talk about in March. And so let me try to summarize those random thoughts to say, like, for example, Act 16 changed the definition for tiered offenses to include inchoates to those certain tiers, I think tier 1 and 2 offenses. What does that mean for us? It doesn't mean that we have to do anything different in the guidelines, but we are tracking that. And should there need to be a change in our online application, we make those changes so it's real time for practitioners. Act 18, that's the sentencing enhancement that I talked about for homicide by vehicle or aggravated assault by vehicle, and the omnibus policies in place there. And so any updates that would need to happen in SGS Web can be made by staff. Act 103, that was a creation of a new offense. I think racing on highways. I can't remember the specifics, but the point of it is to use it as an example to say we have an omnibus OGS enhancement. So we can enter that information into SGS Web and we can make these new offenses, notable on our website, and folks know how to define what the offense gravity score for that is. The last one is Act 125, and this will segue into my errata discussion here momentarily. This changed language of child pornography offenses to sexual abuse of children, sexual abuse material. And so what that means for us is that we have to take a look at our offense listing because we have all of those offenses listed as child pornography, but the General Assembly repealed that language and replaced it. And so for us just to to make sure we're consistent. The section hasn't changed of the statute, but the description of the offense, or I should say the label in statute, and then our description in the guidelines will need to be updated. And so what we'll do between this meeting and the March meeting is pull together any information that we have in which we find, a necessary textual change in terms of an edit to the offense listing, not substantive in any nature, but to be consistent with the statute. And the example I want to give is child pornography to sexual abuse material. And we've made use of an errata sheet in the past. And if you recall, I presented in June a number of those sort of textual things that needed to be corrected in the guidelines. And so we anticipate coming to the members in March with a listing of that information for you. And I know we need to get to our break. So a couple of, or I guess a trio of cases that are worth highlighting that are fairly recent is Commonwealth v. Myers. This dealt with prior record score, and it's consistent with the areas in which we're focusing on making sure individuals are aware to not use a prior conviction that leads to the increase in the grade or the statutory maximum of a subsequent conviction. This is a really interesting case, and not because they spelled my last name wrong, but it's an interesting case because it really helps us as staff point to it to say, if a person has a prior PWID and they're charged with a 6105, felon not to possess, you absolutely can consider the prior PWID and the prior record score. Right? It's not falling into that policy of an increase in the grade or the statutory maximum. And we received a lot of those questions when the 8th edition was rolling out. And so that's a really helpful opinion. Colasar dealt with just the correct application of Deanna's law. I know Judge Barres mentioned Deanna's law earlier. We certainly have had discussions around the application of that statute. So I just make you aware of that. Ultimately, I think for me, the takeaway with only a minute or so to spare is to say that, they have to sentence that DUI consecutive to any offense. Right? It's not just consecutive to a DUI. So if a person's coming in for a variety of offenses, that DUI, third or subsequent DUI, becomes consecutive to any of those other ones. And then the last one is Commonwealth v. Barry, and this ties to the guidelines. And what ultimately came out of this case was that the sentencing court used a person's prior arrests as factors for departing from the sentencing guidelines. And the court said that was inappropriate use of a prior arrest and not prior convictions. So I think that's, those are notable things and relate to the sentencing statutes and the guidelines. And to get us to the break here, I'll just mention that, you've heard us talk a lot about certification of compliance and our efforts around that in recent years, and we continue to work on that. Bobby and his unit will be gearing up to reach out to counties in the beginning of the year. We sent a preliminary notice to counties to make sure they're getting their sentences reported. They'll have till the end of January to report all of 2024 sentences. And then we're also building out our effort to make sure courts are reporting resentences of probation. That's been a real problem area for us to make sure we're getting that. We're trying to target 2025 as, 2024 data, but 2025 is the year to make sure we get really high compliance and reporting of resentences, which will help us fill out and finalize this sort of process around certification of compliance. And then lastly, as we continue, we've had some setbacks, but I think we're pretty close to getting caught up with our annual reports, and we anticipate in the first quarter of 2025 being caught up with our past annual reports. All right, Executive Director, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. And I'll just make one request and then we can take a break, which is I think the guest speakers have been really enlightening to the mission as well as to staff. And if anyone has suggestions for future speakers, please email me and I will share those with the chair and the vice chair for consideration at future meetings. And with that, I'll turn it to the chair, but maybe 11:10, Judge Marsigo.
Works for me. That's fine.
Okay. Thank you.